Case 1. Makaylia Jolley, May 12, 2022, Rankin County, Mississippi. There are moments in a community's history that do not fade with time. They do not soften at the edges the way most memories do. They stay sharp and jagged, lodged somewhere between the conscious and the unconscious, surfacing unexpectedly during a quiet drive down a familiar street. During an ordinary afternoon, when the sun sits at that exact angle, it was sitting on a day nobody asked to remember. For the people of Pearl, Mississippi, a suburb of Jackson in Rankin County, May 12, 2022 is exactly that kind of day. A day that lives in the body, not just the mind. A day that permanently divided time into before and after for every first responder, every bystander, every neighbor who was on North Beardaman Road that Thursday afternoon and witnessed something that no amount of professional training, no amount of lived experience, and no amount of human reasoning could have prepared them for. Pearl is not a large city. It sits just east of Jackson, home to roughly 28,000 residents, the kind of place where people know their neighbors by name, where Little League games draw genuine crowds, and where the local police department is embedded in the fabric of daily life in ways that go beyond enforcement. Officers know the families on their beats. Dispatchers recognize voices. There is a closeness to community policing in a city that size that makes what happened on North Beardaman Road on that May afternoon hit every level of the department like a physical blow, not just as professionals, but as human beings. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Pearl Police Department's dispatch center began receiving 911 calls. Not one call, multiple calls, coming in rapid succession from multiple different people, all of them reporting the same thing, all of them struggling to put into words what they were watching in real time. What the callers described, and what investigators later confirmed through the accounts of numerous eyewitnesses, was an act of violence against the most defenseless human being imaginable. Makaylia Jolley was 20 years old. She had 2 children. Her oldest, a young boy, was living with family. Her youngest was a daughter named Makaylia Jolley, who on that afternoon was 8 weeks old and weighed less than 10 pounds. Makaylia had been alive for 56 days. In the time she had been on this earth, she had never spoken a word, taken a step, chosen a direction, or made a single decision for herself. She was completely, entirely dependent on the one person in the world who was supposed to be her absolute protector. What the witnesses on North Beardaman Road saw, and what they called in to 911 unable to control the trembling in their voices, was Makaylia Jolley taking her 8-week-old daughter by the ankles and slamming the infant onto the concrete road. Not once, multiple times, repeatedly, with force. By the time officers arrived, Jolley had placed the baby on the ground and fled into a wooded area near the road. Another woman at the scene had rushed to Makaylia and was holding the severely injured infant when law enforcement pulled up. The Pearl Fire Department and an ambulance were already en route. First responders began emergency treatment immediately. Pearl Police Chief Dean Scott, who would later speak publicly about the emotional devastation this case caused within his department, directed his officers to personally escort the ambulance carrying Makaylia to Children's Hospital of Mississippi in Jackson rather than let it travel alone. Jolley was pursued into the woods and taken into custody. During her initial interview with investigators, she made a statement that became part of the official record in this case. She said she had hurt her baby and that she did not know why she had done it, but that it had been an accident. Law enforcement noted that she showed no remorse at the scene. Officers who worked the case have since spoken on record about their inability to sleep in the weeks following that afternoon. Pearl Police Chief Scott said publicly that the act had been very deliberate and intentional, and that those words were chosen carefully based on everything investigators observed. Makaylia Jolley was admitted to Blair E. Batson Children's Hospital of Mississippi, in Jackson, where the medical team worked to stabilize her. Medical examinations revealed the full scope of what she had endured on that road. Physicians documented extensive injuries consistent with severe physical trauma, including skull fractures, brain swelling, abrasions across her body, hemorrhaging in both eyes, a fracture to her right elbow, a fracture to her left thumb, and evidence of brain bleeding. She was 8 weeks old, and she had sustained injuries that would challenge the survival of a grown adult. For 2 days, Makaylia fought. Her family, gathered at the hospital, kept vigil. Pearl Police, the district attorney's office, and child welfare investigators worked in coordination, building what would become a capital murder prosecution while simultaneously hoping that the infant would survive. She did not. On Saturday, May 14, 2022, at 4:33 in the afternoon, Makaylia Jolley passed away. The official cause of death was homicide as a result of the injuries she had sustained on that concrete road 2 days earlier. She was 58 days old. The community of Pearl responded with grief and with fury. A balloon release and candlelight vigil were held for Makaylia in the days following her death. Pearl residents gathered to mourn a child most of them had never met, because the loss of Makaylia felt communal, a rupture in the social fabric, a violation of the unspoken covenant that a community holds around its most vulnerable members. Social media filled with tributes. Local churches organized prayer gatherings. And behind all of it was a single, anguished, unanswerable question. Why? The investigation by the Pearl Police Department and the Madison-Rankin County District Attorney's Office, led by District Attorney John K. Bramlett Jr., known as Bubba Bramlett, was thorough and systematic. Investigators interviewed every eyewitness who had been on that road. They interviewed members of Jolley's family about the hours and days leading up to the crime. They gathered medical records, toxicology results, and autopsy findings. What emerged from the investigation was a picture of a young woman who, on the morning of May 12, 2022, had made choices that directly led to the death of her infant daughter. Authorities stated publicly that Jolley had been under the influence of drugs she had taken that morning. District Attorney Bramlett and his office announced almost immediately that they would be seeking the death penalty in this case. Given the nature of the crime, the ages of those involved, a 20-year-old defendant and a 2-month-old victim, and the sheer weight of witness testimony and physical evidence, Rankin County prosecutors determined that this was precisely the kind of case that capital punishment statutes were designed to address. On November 17, 2022, a Rankin County grand jury formally indicted Makaylia Jolley on the charge of capital murder, the killing of Makaylia while in the commission of the felony crime of child abuse. Jolley was held without bond in the Rankin County Jail. In the months that followed, her legal team worked through the formal discovery and pretrial process. On May 15, 2023, the District Attorney's Office made a formal announcement at a court settlement conference. The state of Mississippi would seek the death penalty at trial. A mental health evaluation was ordered. In September of 2023, Jolley was evaluated and found competent to stand trial, meaning the court determined she understood the proceedings against her and could meaningfully participate in her own defense. With that finding in place, plea negotiations began in earnest. The decision to offer a guilty plea in exchange for life without the possibility of parole, rather than proceed to trial, was made deliberately and thoughtfully by the prosecution. Assistant District Attorney Catherine Newman explained the reasoning publicly and with clarity. To take this case to trial would have required eyewitnesses, including ordinary people who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time on a Thursday afternoon, to return to a courtroom and relive what they had seen in graphic detail. It would have required Makaylya's grandmother, who had been present at the scene, to testify. It would have required the first responders, the firefighters, the paramedics, and the police officers who still struggled to sleep months later, to put words to what they had witnessed. The prosecution determined that sparing those individuals from that additional trauma, while still securing permanent imprisonment for Jolley, was the right outcome. On November 6, 2023, in Rankin County Circuit Court before Judge Steve Ratcliffe, Makaylia Jolley entered a plea of guilty to the charge of capital murder. The proceeding lasted approximately 20 minutes. Jolley said little beyond yes, sir, and no, sir, when addressed by the judge. Judge Ratcliffe sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was transferred from the Rankin County Jail to the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. In his statement following the sentencing, District Attorney Bramlett did not mince words. He said that the woman who was supposed to love and support Makaylia had instead chosen something else, and that she would spend the rest of her natural life in prison for what she had done. He thanked the witnesses, the first responders, the medical providers at Blair E. Batson, the Mississippi Children's Safe Center, and every member of law enforcement who had worked this case. He acknowledged, with rare and direct honesty, that those men and women would be forever affected by what they had seen on May 12, 2022. Because of the guilty plea, there will be no appeals. The case is closed. Makaylia Jolley, who was 8 weeks old and had never had the chance to live a single day of the life she deserved, received the only justice the law allows. Her name is permanent now, not because of what happened to her, but because her community refused to let her be forgotten. The candlelight held for her in Pearl in the days after her death was not just grief. It was a promise. For children who have survived what Makaylia could not, organizations like the Mississippi Children's Advocacy Centers provide trauma-informed support, forensic interviews, and resources for families navigating the aftermath of child abuse. They can be reached through their statewide network at the Mississippi Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Child Protective Service partnerships across every county in the state. Makaylia deserved a lifetime. What she got was 58 days. But she is not forgotten. She never will be. If this case moves you the way it moves so many who learn about it, if it makes you want to be part of a community that refuses to look away from hard truths, that holds the justice system accountable, and that honors the memories of those who cannot speak for themselves, then be part of this community. Like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Your support keeps these stories alive and keeps the voices of the voiceless from going silent. Case 2. LaTiffany Chambers, October 31st, 2020, Hinds County, Mississippi. Halloween is a night built around children, around candy and costumes, around the theater of controlled fright, around the delicious, harmless pretense that the darkness holds something to fear. In neighborhoods across Jackson, Mississippi, on the night of October 31st, 2020, parents walked with their children from door to door while the city lit up with jack-o'-lanterns and porch lights and the joyful chaos of kids in superhero capes and witch hats running from yard to yard. It was, by every outward measure, an ordinary Halloween night in an ordinary American city. On Lower Drive in Jackson, behind a closed door in a residential home, there was nothing ordinary happening at all. Jackson Police Department officers received a call that night for an unresponsive person at an address on Lower Drive. It was the kind of call that officers respond to regularly: welfare checks, medical emergencies, people who have collapsed and need assistance. What those officers found when they arrived was not a medical emergency in any conventional sense. What they found was 17-year-old LaMonica Tucker, unresponsive, with what officers described in their official reports as obvious signs of physical abuse. Those two words, obvious signs, carry tremendous weight in a police report. They mean the injuries were visible to the naked eye. They mean no forensic specialist was needed to see that this young woman had been harmed. They mean that any officer, any first responder, any human being who walked through that door could see immediately that LaMonica Tucker had been in a state of ongoing danger inside that home. LaMonica was transported by emergency services to a local Jackson hospital. She did not survive. The medical team worked to save her, and they could not. LaMonica Tucker, 17 years old, died that night. The official investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of what had been happening inside that Lower Drive home. A picture of sustained, systematic harm that spanned not just one victim, but 3 children living under the same roof. The 2 other children in that household, a 14-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, were examined by investigators in the hours after LaMonica's death. Both children showed signs of prolonged physical abuse. Not recent injuries. Prolonged injuries. Evidence of harm that had been inflicted over an extended period of time and had never been reported, never been treated, never been seen by any outside authority. These were children who had been living in a state of danger and suffering that their community, their school system, and their extended family had not known about. The woman at the center of this investigation was LaTiffany Chambers, 32 years old, the mother of all 3 children. Also present as a co-defendant in the investigation was Chambers's fiancé, Danny Dabbs, 29 years old, who had been living in the home. Together, according to the evidence assembled by the Jackson Police Department and the Hinds County District Attorney's Office, they had created a household in which abuse had become routine, in which the children had no safe harbor and no avenue of escape. The autopsy performed on LaMonica Tucker by the medical examiner's office produced findings that the prosecution would later describe as evidence of the extreme nature of what she had endured. Medical examiners documented impact injuries to her head, bruising across her entire body, scarring, fractured ribs, a lung contusion, and evidence of pelvic injury. LaMonica Tucker had not been harmed once, in a single moment of uncontrolled violence. She had been harmed repeatedly, systematically, over time. The autopsy made this undeniable. Chambers and Dabbs were both arrested in connection with the investigation. Both were indicted. Hinds County prosecutors charged Chambers with 1 count of capital murder, the killing of LaMonica while in the commission of the felony of child abuse, and 2 counts of felonious child abuse for the injuries sustained by the 14-year-old and the 12-year-old. Dabbs was charged separately and prosecuted on parallel charges. What followed were separate trials. Chambers's case went first. The trial of LaTiffany Chambers was heard in the Circuit Court of Hinds County. The prosecution presented the full weight of the physical evidence, the autopsy findings, the medical examinations of the surviving children, the testimony of investigators, the documentation of every injury cataloged in the days following LaMonica's death. Chambers's defense presented their case. The jury deliberated. On April 13, 2023, after hearing everything that the prosecution and the defense had put before them, the Hinds County jury returned their verdict. Guilty. Guilty of capital murder for the death of LaMonica Tucker. Guilty of felony child abuse on 2 counts for the harm done to her other children. The sentencing that followed reflected the gravity of what the jury had determined. LaTiffany Chambers was sentenced to life in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole for the capital murder conviction. She was additionally sentenced to 10 years for each felony child abuse conviction. Those additional years, added to the life sentence, ensure that even if some future procedural anomaly were to create a window in the lifetime imprisonment, additional time would remain. In practical terms, LaTiffany Chambers will not leave prison. Danny Dabbs was convicted separately on a charge of second-degree murder and 2 counts of child abuse. He received a sentence of 60 years in prison. The case did not end with sentencing. Chambers appealed her conviction and sentence, as is her legal right under Mississippi law. The Mississippi Court of Appeals received the appeal and reviewed the trial record, the evidence, the legal arguments made by both the prosecution and the defense. On February 23, 2025, the Court of Appeals issued its ruling. The conviction was affirmed. The sentence was affirmed. The court found no legal basis to disturb what the Hinds County jury had determined in April 2023. LaMonica Tucker was 17 years old. She should have been worrying about her junior year of high school, about what she wanted to do after graduation, about all the completely ordinary things that 17-year-olds worry about. Instead, she spent what turned out to be the final chapter of her life inside a home where the people who were supposed to love her most had become the source of the greatest danger she would ever face. Her 2 younger siblings, the 14-year-old and the 12-year-old, survived. They were removed from that environment and placed into the care of appropriate authorities. Their futures, whatever shape they take, will be built in the long shadow of what happened on Lower Drive, but they are alive. They have the chance LaMonica did not. Child abuse, when it occurs inside a home, is by its very nature hidden. The most dangerous abuse is the kind that never reaches the attention of teachers, coaches, pediatricians, neighbors, or family friends, not because those people are negligent, but because abusers create environments of concealment and silence. Organizations like the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, reachable at 1-800-422-4453, exist precisely for the moments when something feels wrong about a child's situation. That hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and a call can be anonymous. If you see something, please say something. LaMonica Tucker deserved someone to say something. Justice, in this case, came through the work of the Jackson Police Department, the Hinds County District Attorney's Office, and the 12 members of a jury who sat with the full weight of this evidence and returned a verdict that held the truth. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is what the law allows, and it is what LaMonica Tucker's memory deserved. If this story has moved you, if it reminds you why these cases matter and why the communities that surround our most vulnerable children have an obligation to stay watchful and engaged, please take a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscriber is a person who believes these stories deserve to be told, and every view is a reminder to the families of victims like LaMonica that they are not walking this road alone. Case 3. Adrienne McDevitt, June 18, 2024, Lauderdale County, Mississippi. Meridian, Mississippi sits at the crossroads of the state, a city with deep musical roots and a complicated, layered history, the seat of Lauderdale County, and a community that prides itself on resilience. The county that surrounds it stretches into quieter rural terrain, where roads like Bowlin Long Creek Road wind through the kind of Mississippi landscape that has inspired writers and photographers for generations: green, dense, and private. Private in a way that is both beautiful and, sometimes, dangerous. Because privacy, in the wrong circumstances, means that what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. On the evening of June 18, 2024, Lauderdale County Sheriff's deputies and emergency responders received a call about a disturbance at an address on Bowlin Long Creek Road. Disturbance calls are among the most common calls law enforcement receives, and they cover an enormous range of situations. Officers approach them with training, with alertness, and with the kind of readiness that comes from not knowing exactly what they will find. What they found on Bowlin Long Creek Road that Tuesday evening was not what any of them had prepared for. Inside the home, they found the body of 2-year-old Kelly McDevitt Jr. He was gone. His mother, Adrienne McDevitt, was alone in the home with him. Lauderdale County Sheriff Ward Calhoun is not a man known for dramatic public statements. He speaks carefully and deliberately, with the gravity of someone who understands that everything he says on record will be measured against what investigators ultimately prove. When he stood at a press conference on June 19, 2024, to address reporters and the community, his words were chosen with that same deliberateness. He said that based on the investigation conducted at the scene overnight and into the morning, it was his department's belief that Kelly McDevitt Jr. had been forcibly drowned. 2 words: forcibly drowned. Sheriff Calhoun chose them carefully, and they landed like stones. Adrienne McDevitt was taken first to a local medical facility, standard procedure in certain investigative situations, and then transferred to the custody of the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office. She was booked on an initial charge of murder, with a bond set at $500,000. Investigators made clear from the outset that the case would be presented to a grand jury once the investigation was complete, and that the charges could change based on the results of a formal autopsy. Those autopsy results came. They came with the precision and finality that forensic pathology provides when applied to the most somber questions a society can ask. The preliminary results were reviewed by the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Office and shared with District Attorney's Office prosecutors, who analyzed what the forensic evidence established about the nature and manner of Kelly's death. On June 24, 2024, Sheriff Calhoun made another public announcement. Based on the preliminary autopsy results, and following consultation with the District Attorney's Office, the charge against Adrienne McDevitt was being upgraded. She was now charged with capital murder. Bond was removed entirely. She was held without bond in the Lauderdale County Detention Center. Kelly McDevitt Jr. was 2 years old. He had been alive long enough to learn to walk, to say his first words, to develop the personality and the curiosity and the absolute fearlessness that characterizes children at that age. That window of life when everything is new and wondrous and the world has not yet taught you to be afraid. He weighed perhaps 30 pounds. He was not capable of defending himself against anyone or anything. He depended, as all 2-year-olds depend, on the adults around him to be his protection, his safety, his entire world. The Lauderdale County community responded to Kelly's death with the combination of grief, anger, and quiet solidarity that small Mississippi communities have always brought to their darkest moments. Sheriff Calhoun, speaking at the initial press conference, said simply, "This is certainly a tragic event for this family and for our community." He was right. It was both of those things. It was a tragedy for the McDevitt family, for Kelly's father, for his extended family, for everyone who loved that little boy. And it was a tragedy for a community that is now left to sit with the knowledge that a 2-year-old child did not have to lose his life. As of the time this documentary was produced, the case against Adrienne McDevitt remained pending in Lauderdale County. She remains in custody without bond. The case is expected to proceed before a Lauderdale County grand jury, and formal trial proceedings are anticipated to follow the completion of the full investigation. The Mississippi judicial system moves with methodical deliberateness, particularly in capital cases, and the weight of what happened on Bowling Long Creek Road in June 2024 will be carried by that system for as long as it takes to reach its conclusion. Kelly McDevitt Jr. deserved to grow up. He deserved birthday cakes and playground afternoons and all the entirely unremarkable joy of a childhood in Mississippi. The fact that he did not get those things, the fact that his life ended at 2 years old inside a home that should have been his safest place, is a weight that does not lift. It is carried by the investigators who worked his case, by the first responders who arrived on Bowling Long Creek Road that June evening, by Sheriff Calhoun, who stood in front of cameras and told the truth about what his deputies believed had happened, and by a community that has gathered around Kelly's memory the way communities do when they refuse to let a child be forgotten. The system of child protective oversight in Mississippi, including the Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services, works in partnership with law enforcement to identify children at risk before crises occur. If you have concerns about a child in your community, the Mississippi Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-CHILDREN exists to receive those reports confidentially and connect them to the appropriate investigators. One phone call can change everything. For Kelly, the investigation continues. For his memory, the community of Lauderdale County stands watch. And for the justice he deserves, the work of the sheriff's office, the medical examiner, and the district attorney's office will continue until the full truth of what happened on June 18, 2024, has been placed before a court of law. Please like this video, leave a comment for Little Kelly below, and make sure you are subscribed to Cold Case Hour so you do not miss any updates as this case moves through the courts. Case 4. Tameshia Shelton, October 16, 2009, Clay County, Mississippi. There is a category of true crime case that resists simple classification. Cases that begin as one thing and become, over time, something far more complicated, far more philosophically troubling, and far more revealing about the limits and the obligations of the justice system than the original facts might suggest. The case of Tameshia Shelton of West Point, Mississippi, in Clay County, is precisely that kind of case. It is not a straightforward story of guilt and punishment. It is a story about what happens when the machinery of justice is set in motion against a person, reaches a verdict, and then, more than 15 years later, finds itself confronted with evidence that it may have gotten that verdict wrong. This case requires careful handling. The facts are real. The legal proceedings are documented. And the outcome is, as of December 2025, genuinely unsettled. We present it here not to render a verdict of our own, but because the story, in all its complexity, is one that demands to be told honestly. Tameshia Shelton was a mother of 4 living in the Mahone Valley community near West Point, Mississippi, in October 2009. Her younger sister, Kedna Tutton, was in a relationship with a man named Donnell Young, who lived in Forest, Mississippi, and traveled to Clay County regularly to visit her. On the evening of October 16, 2009, an argument occurred between Kedna and Young. According to accounts developed during the investigation, the argument had been intense, the kind of argument that can escalate between 2 people in a relationship that has become strained and painful. After the argument, Young walked to Shelton's trailer, which was nearby. What happened next is the central dispute of this entire case. Shelton told investigators that Young knocked on her window, that she went to the door, and that Young told her he only needed 1 bullet to kill a raccoon. She said she told him he might need more than 1, and that she loaded her small caliber pistol and gave it to him. She said she heard a shot, and when Young did not return, she went outside and found him collapsed on the gravel driveway. She called 911. Investigators arrived to find Young with a single gunshot wound to the chest, fired at very close range from Shelton's pistol. Gunshot residue was found on Shelton's hands and on her pajamas. There was no evidence presented at the time of a history of suicidal ideation from Young. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy, Dr. Liam Funt, ruled the manner of death as homicide, based, he testified, on the trajectory of the bullet, which traveled from the front of the chest to the back, without significant deviation. In July 2015, a Clay County jury convicted Tameshia Shelton of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. She would not be eligible for parole until 2043, when she would be 65 years old. She had been maintaining her innocence from the moment of her arrest. The case was featured on the television program Snapped, which brought national attention to the story. And in the years following her conviction, a chain of events began that would ultimately unravel the foundation of the prosecution's case. Shelton's legal team, working with the Mississippi Innocence Project under the leadership of attorney Sandra Levick, began assembling a post-conviction case built around two categories of evidence that had not been before the jury at trial. The first was a dramatic change in the position of the forensic pathologist. Dr. Funt, reviewing the case in light of published peer-reviewed scientific studies that had not been available to him or presented to him at the time of his original autopsy and trial testimony, substantially revised his conclusion. He determined that the studies he had not been aware of at trial showed that the trajectory of the bullet through Young's chest was entirely consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He changed his determination of the manner of death from homicide to undetermined, leaning towards suicide. He testified under oath during post-conviction hearings that he could no longer say the death was a homicide. That testimony, from the prosecution's own forensic pathologist, is among the most significant post-conviction reversals in Mississippi legal history. The second category of evidence was a document. During those post-conviction hearings, the existence of an apparent handwritten note left by Donnell Young came to light. That note had not been presented to the jury at trial. The note referenced Young's feelings about Kedena and contained language that, in context, multiple forensic and legal experts interpreted as consistent with a person in profound emotional distress. The original defense attorney had not introduced the note into evidence at trial. The post-conviction legal team argued this constituted a failure of adequate representation. Clay County Circuit Judge James Kitchens presided over multiple days of hearings in this matter. In April 2024, after years of delays and procedural litigation, Judge Kitchens issued his ruling. He denied the request for a new trial, despite the pathologist's reversal and despite the note. He ruled that Mississippi law did not require a forensic pathologist to determine homicide before a jury could convict of murder, and he addressed neither the apparent note nor the forensic demonstrations conducted at the hearings. Shelton's lawyers appealed immediately to the Mississippi Court of Appeals. On December 15, 2025, the Mississippi Court of Appeals issued its ruling in a 7-3 decision written by Chief Judge Donna Barnes. The court concluded that Judge Kitchens had committed clear error in denying Shelton's motion for post-conviction relief. The court cited two grounds: the dramatic reversal by the forensic pathologist who had originally provided the core scientific basis for the homicide determination, and the failure of the original defense attorney to introduce the apparent note written by Young into evidence at trial. The appeals court found that given the potentially significant nature of that note, its absence had prejudiced Shelton's defense. The court reversed the circuit court's judgment. It remanded the case for a new trial. After more than 10 years in prison, Tameshia Shelton's conviction was vacated. The Mississippi Attorney General's office responded by seeking a rehearing before the Court of Appeals, arguing that the original defense attorney's decision not to introduce the note did not constitute deficient performance. That request remained pending as of the time this documentary was completed. Whether Shelton is ultimately retried, acquitted, or released will be determined by proceedings that have not yet concluded. What does this case mean? It means that the justice system, which is built and operated by human beings, is not immune to error. It means that forensic science evolves, and that what was accepted as certainty at one point in time can be reconsidered in light of new knowledge. It means that a woman spent more than a decade in a Mississippi prison under a conviction that the state's own appellate court ultimately found was built on a compromised foundation. And it means that Donnell Young's family, who have lived for 15 years with the verdict that his death was a homicide, now face the uncertainty of a legal process that is once again unresolved. There are no clean answers in this case. There are only hard questions, and an ongoing legal proceeding that will eventually produce the next chapter of a story that began on a gravel driveway in Clay County on an October night in 2009. Whatever that chapter says, it will be the product of a justice system that, however imperfectly, however slowly, is capable of examining its own conclusions. Cold Case Hour will continue to follow the Shelton case as it develops. If you believe these complicated, challenging stories deserve the same careful attention as more straightforward cases. If you believe that truth matters even when it is uncomfortable, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter. Case 5. Kierra Patrick, January 26, 2025, Scott County, Mississippi. There is a particular kind of grief that communities feel when a child disappears without anyone noticing. Not a disappearance into a stranger's car, not an abduction that generates headlines and Amber Alerts and the full mobilization of search teams and media attention, but a disappearance so quiet, so deliberately concealed, that the child simply ceases to exist in the world while the people who should have been watching claim to know nothing. These are the cases that investigators find hardest to sit with. Not because the crime itself is more terrible than others, though it often is, but because the silence itself is a crime. The absence of an alarm is, in these cases, the evidence. Zymer Fenderson was 3 years old. He lived in Lake, Mississippi, in Scott County, with his father, Rodkeys Fenderson, and his father's girlfriend and soon-to-be common-law partner, Kierra Patrick, who was 24 years old. By all accounts available through the investigation, Zymer was a small child in a small household in a small town. Not a child who had a public profile, not a child whose life generated documentation outside of his family circle. He was simply a little boy living his life with the two adults who were responsible for his safety. According to the investigation conducted by the Scott County Sheriff's Office, the last day that Zymer was seen alive was January 26, 2025. What happened to him on that day, and in the days and weeks that followed, went unreported to law enforcement. Zymer was never reported missing. His extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, began reaching out, asking questions, trying to arrange visits and phone calls and the ordinary contact that families maintain. They were given answers. Different answers, at different times, from different people. Stories that shifted. Explanations that did not align. The particular evasiveness of people who are concealing something they cannot allow anyone to see. In April 2025, approximately 3 months after Zymer's disappearance, the Scott County Sheriff's Office received a tip. Scott County Sheriff Mike Lee later explained to reporters how the investigation had begun. An investigator in his office had a conversation with someone who mentioned, almost in passing, that they had not seen the child in quite some time. That investigator made a note, asked a follow-up question, and began pulling on a thread. What the thread led to, when fully unraveled, was a picture of deliberate concealment that extended across 3 months and involved multiple false accounts given to multiple members of an extended family who were desperately trying to understand where a little boy had gone. Kierra Patrick, when interviewed by investigators, eventually confirmed what the evidence was already pointing toward. Zymer was not alive. He had not been alive since January 26th. His father, Rodkeys Fenderson, faced with the weight of the investigation and the impossibility of maintaining the deception any longer, provided the critical piece of information that moved the case from investigation to recovery. He showed deputies where Zymer's body had been buried. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, the Mississippi State University Anthropology Department, and the Mississippi Crime Scene Unit were all brought in to assist with the recovery. These are not agencies summoned for routine investigations. Their presence at a recovery site reflects the gravity and the sensitivity of what investigators were dealing with, the careful, methodical work of bringing a child home from wherever he had been placed. On Friday, April 25, 2025, Zymer Fenderson's remains were recovered from a burial location in Lake, Mississippi. He had been in the ground since late January. He had been 3 years old when his life ended. Rodkeys Fenderson was charged with murder. Kierra Patrick was charged as an accessory after the fact to murder. The charge against Patrick, accessory after the fact, reflects what investigators determined about her specific role in the events that followed Zymer's death on January 26th. She did not, according to the charges as filed, report what had happened to law enforcement. She did not seek help for the child. She participated, through her actions and her words over the following 3 months, in maintaining the deception that kept Zymer's fate hidden from his family and from the authorities who could have begun the process of justice and accountability far sooner. In the landscape of criminal culpability, the distinction between a principal actor and an accessory is significant in legal terms. But in human terms, The weight carried by someone who knows what happened to a child and chooses silence, who watches a family search for answers while holding those answers, who tells different stories to different people to buy more time, is its own kind of testimony to what happened in that household in Scott County during the winter and spring of 2025. Scott County is not a large jurisdiction. Lake, Mississippi, where this case unfolded, is a small community where people know each other, where children are visible, and where the absence of a small boy from the world he had been inhabiting should have created a ripple that someone, somewhere, could not ignore. That it took 3 months for the right information to reach the right investigator is a fact that the Scott County community will sit with for a long time. Zymer Fenderson deserved more. He deserved the protection that every 3-year-old child deserves simply by virtue of existing. He deserved adults who, in his darkest moment, would have put his life above every other consideration. He did not receive that protection. What he received instead was concealment and silence. What he received, ultimately, was the painstaking work of the investigators and forensic specialists who brought him home in April 2025 and ensured that the truth about what happened to him would not remain buried alongside him. The case against Rodkeys Fenderson and Kierra Patrick moves forward through the Scott County judicial system. The charges carry significant penalties under Mississippi law. The families of both defendants and of Zymer himself are navigating a grief that is complicated by circumstances no family should ever face. For families who are concerned about a child's welfare or who have information about a missing child, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children operates the cyber tip line and the national hotline at 1-800-THE-LOST, 1-800-843-5678, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Zymer's case is a reminder of what can happen when the people with the most critical information choose not to make that call. Please, if you know something, say something. For little Zymer, whose 3 years on this earth deserved so much more than what they got, this community sees you. Cold Case Hour sees you. If this story has impacted you, please like this video, drop a comment in the section below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you do not miss a single update on this case or any others we bring to you from across Mississippi and beyond. Case 6. Chelsea Anding, February 21st, 2024, Adams County, Mississippi. Natchez, Mississippi, is one of the oldest cities in the state, a city layered with history, with a Mississippi River waterfront that has witnessed more of American life than most places on the continent, and with a community that has, over generations, built something resilient from difficult soil. It is a city that takes pride in its survival, in its ability to carry hard truths without being crushed by them. In February 2024, the community of Natchez was asked to carry another hard truth, one that arrived not through the pages of history, but through the emergency rooms of its hospitals and the investigation of its police department. On a Tuesday morning in February, a social worker at Blair E. Batson Children's Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi, placed a phone call to the Natchez Police Department. The call was a professional obligation, a mandatory reporting duty that social workers, medical professionals, and other child-serving professionals carry under Mississippi law. The call was about a 9-month-old infant who had been brought in with a severe injury to the back of the head and was in critical condition. The infant had first arrived at Merit Health Natchez, the local hospital in Adams County, by ambulance, transported there by emergency responders who had responded to the family's home. The injury to the back of the head was serious enough that the child was transferred almost immediately by medical air transport to Children's of Mississippi in Jackson, where the level of pediatric trauma care available is greater. It was there, as the medical team worked to stabilize the infant and assess the full extent of the injury, that the social worker made the call. Natchez Police Chief Cal Green responded to the information with the urgency it demanded. On February 21, 2024, his department arrested Chelsea Anding, 38 years old, on an initial charge of felony child abuse. She was taken into custody, interviewed, and held overnight at the police department. The following morning, the infant was placed on life support. On February 23, 2024, the infant was removed from life support and did not survive. The social and medical and legal circumstances of this case had now reached their most devastating point. A 9-month-old child had died from a severe head injury sustained in circumstances that the police investigation was treating as a criminal matter. Chelsea Anding appeared before Municipal Judge Christina Diarty for arraignment on the morning of February 23rd. During that arraignment, with the news of the infant's death now before the court, Judge Diarty upgraded the charge. Chelsea Anding was no longer charged with felony child abuse. She was now charged with second-degree murder. Her bond was set at $500,000. Natchez Police Chief Green spoke publicly about the case with a candor that was evident even in the carefully managed language of a law enforcement statement. He confirmed that Anding had 4 other children, all under the age of 6, at the home. He confirmed that all of those children had been removed from the household by Child Protective Services and were in protective placement pending the outcome of the CPS investigation. He made a statement that would be parsed carefully by everyone who heard it. He said that Anding had been a stay-at-home mother and that she may have become overwhelmed. He said it was no excuse. He was right. The acknowledgement that a parent can reach a point of overwhelming stress is not an exculpation. It is a recognition of a reality that child welfare advocates, pediatric psychologists, and social workers have documented extensively, that the combination of isolation, financial stress, sleep deprivation, and the relentless demands of caring for multiple, very young children can create conditions of profound psychological distress. But distress, however real and however serious, does not transfer the burden of its consequences onto a 9-month-old infant who had no capacity to understand, avoid, or survive what was done to her. Adams County, in which Natchez sits, is one of Mississippi's smaller counties, a community where the loss of a child is not an abstraction but a tangible rupture felt in churches, in schools, in the conversations people have at the grocery store and on their porches. The loss of this infant, unnamed in public court records out of standard legal practice for child victims of this age, was a community wound that went beyond the legal proceedings it generated. Chelsea Anding retained legal representation. Her case was bound over to the Adams County Circuit Court. A status hearing was scheduled for March 19, 2024. As of the time this documentary was produced, the case remained pending in the Adams County judicial system, working through the processes that capital and serious felony cases require before reaching trial. Anding remains charged with second-degree murder. The 4 other children who were in that household, the siblings of the infant who did not survive, have been in the protective custody of the Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services. Their futures will be shaped in ways that are impossible to fully predict, but they are alive, and they are being cared for by the systems that exist precisely for moments when a child's own home becomes the source of danger rather than the source of safety. Postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and other perinatal mental health conditions affect a significant number of new and recent mothers each year across Mississippi and the United States. These are real, recognized medical conditions that respond to treatment when that treatment is sought and made available. For any parent who is struggling, who is feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, or afraid of their own responses to the demands of parenting, the Postpartum Support International Helpline is available at 1-800-944-4773. This call is not a sign of weakness. It is the bravest phone call a struggling parent can make, and it can change the outcome for everyone in the household. The infant who died on February 23, 2024, in Jackson, Mississippi, lived for 9 months on this earth. She was not given the chance to grow up, to walk, to speak, to choose her own path through the world. She deserved that chance. She deserved every ordinary day that should have been ahead of her. Adams County will see this case to its conclusion. Cold Case Hour will be here when it does. Like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and leave a comment for this little one in the section below. Your engagement matters, and it keeps these stories alive. Case 7. Elizabeth Marie Barhonovich, June 14, 2018, Jackson County, Mississippi. Jackson County stretches along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, the southernmost edge of the state, where the land flattens out toward the water and the summer air carries a particular weight, a thick, pressing heat that in June can push temperatures well past the point of danger for anyone who remains in it without relief. This is not abstract. The residents of Jackson County understand this the way people always understand the specific dangers of their own geography. They know what June heat does. They know what a closed car does to that heat. They know the warnings that go out every summer, The public service announcements, the reminders from pediatricians and police departments and child safety organizations. Never leave a child in a vehicle unattended. Not for a minute. Not in June in Mississippi. On June 14, 2018, in Vancleave, a community within Jackson County located on Arthur Avenue, 10-month-old Cash Barhonovich did not survive the summer heat. Elizabeth Marie Barhonovich was 28 years old. Cash was her son, 10 months old. At that age when babies are discovering the world through touch and taste, and the absolute determination to pull themselves upright and take those first tentative steps toward everywhere. He was at the beginning of everything. And on June 14th, he was left in his mother's vehicle outside their home, while Elizabeth Barhonovich was inside. Jackson County Sheriff Makaylia's office was called when Cash was found in the vehicle. Preliminary autopsy results established the cause of death as hyperthermia, a body temperature so dramatically elevated above normal that the body's systems can no longer sustain themselves. In an enclosed vehicle in Mississippi in June, the interior temperature can climb to levels that would challenge the survival of a healthy adult within an hour. For a 10-month-old infant with a body mass that retains and generates heat differently than an adult, the timeline is even more brutal. Barhonovich was initially charged with second-degree murder. She was booked into the Jackson County Adult Detention Center without bond, then transferred briefly to the Harrison County Jail to address a prior parole violation stemming from a previous 7-year burglary sentence. A detail that painted a picture of a life already marked by sustained poor decision-making and serious consequences that had, until that June morning, not yet touched her children. The investigation that followed was thorough and specific in its findings. This was the point at which the case moved from a tragic accident into the territory of criminal accountability. Investigators determined that what happened to Cash Barhonovich on June 14, 2018, was not a case of a distracted parent who had simply, tragically forgotten a child was in the car. The investigation revealed that Barhonovich had been engaged in a multi-day pattern of substance use, that she had been using drugs on the day before and on the morning of the incident. The determination made by law enforcement and confirmed through the investigative record was explicit. This was not a child who had been accidentally forgotten. This was a child whose mother's attention, judgment, and protective instincts had been profoundly compromised by the choices she had made in the days and hours leading up to June 14th. District Attorney Tony Lawrence, whose office prosecuted the case, addressed this directly in his public statement following the resolution of the proceedings. He said that Cash had died because his mother had made the choice to put something else before her child's life. He said it with the sadness that characterizes a prosecutor who has seen too many cases like this, and with the clarity that characterizes a prosecutor who refuses to let that sadness obscure the accountability that cases like this demand. In the months following her arrest, the case moved through the Jackson County judicial system. On November 15, 2018, exactly 5 months after Cash's death, Elizabeth Marie Barhonovich appeared in Jackson County Circuit Court before Judge Robert Krebs and entered a plea of guilty. The charge had been reduced from second-degree murder to manslaughter as part of the plea agreement, reflecting the circumstances of the case as the prosecution had analyzed them. Judge Krebs sentenced Barhonovich to 20 years, the maximum penalty available for manslaughter under Mississippi law. He ordered that sentence to run consecutively to the prior sentence she was already serving out of Harrison County, meaning she would not begin serving the 20 years for Cash's death until her existing sentence had been completed. Cash Barhonovich was 10 months old. He was beginning to pull himself upright against furniture, to babble with intent, to look at the world with the particular brightness that characterizes babies at that stage. He had a whole childhood ahead of him, years of school and friendships, and seasons and ordinary days that he would never see. He died on a June afternoon in a parked car outside the home where his mother had chosen to be. Jackson County Circuit Court Judge Krebs's decision to impose the maximum sentence, running consecutively rather than concurrently with the existing sentence, reflected a judicial determination that the circumstances here, the sustained pattern of substance use that led to the child's death, the prior criminal history, the complete abdication of parental responsibility, warranted the fullest application of the law. Elizabeth Barhonovich will be in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections for a substantial period of time. The drug crisis in Mississippi, as in every state in the country, touches families across every demographic and every geography. It does not discriminate by income, by neighborhood, or by the presence or absence of children in a household. But when children are present, when the decisions made inside the grip of addiction have consequences for small people who cannot protect themselves, the law has an obligation to respond. Jackson County responded. Judge Krebs responded. The 20-year sentence, running consecutively, is that response in the language of the law. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, operates a national helpline at 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357, for families and individuals struggling with substance use disorders. It is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. For any parent who recognizes themselves in the pattern described in this case, who sees the distance growing between who they are and who their children need them to be, that phone call is the beginning of a different story. Please make it. Cash Barhonovich deserved every morning. He deserved every June. He is remembered. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and leave a comment below. Your community of support is what makes this work possible and what keeps these memories alive. Case 8. Samantha Enfinger, March 18, 2025, Pearl River County, Mississippi. Picayune, Mississippi, sits in the southwestern corner of Pearl River County, close enough to the Louisiana border that the two states have always shared something of a cultural common ground. The food, the music, the particular cadence of life along that stretch of the Gulf South. It is a community of roughly 12,000 people, a city that has rebuilt itself after natural disaster, that has carved a place for itself in Mississippi's history through sheer persistence, and that in March 2025 found itself at the center of a story that nobody in the community wanted to be part of. On the morning of Tuesday, March 18, 2025, officers with the Picayune Police Department were dispatched to a home on Crestwood Drive at approximately 10:18 in the morning. The call was about a deceased child. The child was 3 years old. Her name was Aurora Enfinger. When officers arrived at the Crestwood Drive address, they found Aurora unresponsive, and their initial assessment was immediate and unambiguous. This was not a natural death, not an accidental death, not the result of illness or the random cruelty of medical misfortune. Investigators suspected foul play from the moment they entered that home. The death was formally ruled a homicide. Detectives executed a search warrant for the home and began the meticulous process of gathering physical evidence. In the course of that search, investigators located and recovered controlled substances, specifically steroids, which led to an additional layer of criminal charges. Both Samantha Enfinger and Christian Enfinger, Aurora's parents, were arrested on charges of possession of a controlled substance with the intent to distribute. Both were booked into custody. The formal autopsy was conducted on Friday, March 21st, by the Pearl River County Coroner's Office. The findings were released publicly by the coroner, and they were specific and severe. Aurora Enfinger, 3 years old, had died as a result of significant blunt force injuries to the head and abdomen. She had also sustained a lacerated liver. The coroner's office additionally confirmed what the investigators had been working toward through their evidence collection. The injuries that ended Aurora's life had been inflicted by her stepmother, Samantha Enfinger. On March 20th, 2025, before the formal autopsy release but following the initial findings that had been shared with investigators, Samantha Enfinger was recharged. Her original drug possession charge remained, but a new and far more serious charge was added: capital murder. She was booked on that charge and held in the Pearl River County Jail. Christian Enfinger, Aurora's father, remained charged with the drug offenses. The investigation was ongoing regarding his role and knowledge of the events that led to Aurora's death. The distinction between the charges facing the two adults in that household, capital murder for Samantha, drug charges for Christian, reflects the specific evidence that investigators developed through the search of the home, the autopsy findings, and the coroner's public statement about the source of Aurora's injuries. The Picayune Police Department's statement following the charges was brief, but it contained something beyond the standard language of law enforcement communication. Officers wrote that the situation was a tragic one, that their thoughts and prayers were with those who had cared for Aurora, and that they asked the public to pray for everyone impacted by the crime. Then they added a final sentence, for words that have stayed with many people who followed this case. Never forget this beautiful child. Never forget this beautiful child. Aurora Enfinger was 3 years old. She had the age and the worldview of a child who is just beginning to make sense of everything around her, who knows her own name, who has opinions about her favorite foods, who has favorite songs and favorite games, and a laugh that the people who loved her will carry with them for the rest of their lives. She was at the beginning of herself. And on March 18, 2025, in a house on Crestwood Drive in Picayune, Mississippi, that beginning was taken from her. Pearl River County District Attorney's Office will prosecute the capital murder case against Samantha Enfinger through the circuit court. Capital murder cases in Mississippi carry the possibility of the death penalty, and the decision about whether to seek that penalty is one that the District Attorney's Office makes based on the specific facts and circumstances of each individual case. The case will work through the Mississippi judicial system with the full weight of what the forensic evidence establishes. For the community of Picayune, the loss of Aurora is a wound that will take time to process and longer to heal. Communities respond to the deaths of children with a particular kind of grief, not because adult lives matter less, but because the death of a child represents the loss of everything that should have been ahead of them. Every parent in Picayune, every neighbor on Crestwood Drive, every teacher in every school in Pearl River County felt the echo of what happened on that Tuesday morning. That grief is the community's testimony to the value of Aurora's life. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233, offers support for individuals in any situation involving harm, including situations where children may be at risk. Anyone who has concerns about a child's safety is encouraged to contact their local law enforcement or the Mississippi Child Protective Services reporting line. Aurora's case is a reminder that the adults who surround a family, neighbors, extended family, community members, are sometimes the last line of protection that a child has. Aurora Enfinger, 3 years old, never forgotten. Please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and leave a comment for Aurora in the section below. Your engagement is how we keep these stories alive and these children remembered. Case 9. Brianna Nichole Young, January 15, 2023, Lee County, Mississippi. Tupelo, Mississippi, is perhaps the most famous small city in the state, the birthplace of Elvis Presley, a community that has built a powerful identity around music, around history, around the pride of a city that produced something that changed the world and never forgot where it came from. It is a city of approximately 40,000 people in Lee County, in the northeastern corner of Mississippi, with strong civic institutions, a dedicated medical center in North Mississippi Medical Center, and a police department that has handled its share of difficult cases over the years. On the morning of Sunday, January 15, 2023, Tupelo police officers and firefighters responded to a home on Gun Club Road for a death investigation. The call that brought them there concerned a child who was unresponsive. When they arrived, they found 5-year-old Caleb Bogan. Emergency responders performed CPR. He was transported to North Mississippi Medical Center. Lee County Coroner Carolyn Green pronounced Caleb dead at the medical center that morning. Caleb Bogan was 5 years old. He had been diagnosed as nonverbal and autistic, a child who communicated differently from most children his age, whose needs required patience and specific attentiveness, and who was in every meaningful sense entirely dependent on the adults around him to interpret his world and protect his well-being. He was 5 years old, and he weighed, by the medical record, significantly less than a healthy child his age should have weighed. The preliminary autopsy conducted at the State Medical Examiner's Office in Pearl produced findings that Lee County Coroner Green described publicly in terms that were precise and unambiguous. Caleb had sustained thermal injuries to his face consistent with hot bath water. He had scarring and markings on his back and legs consistent with having been struck repeatedly with an instrument. He had burns on other parts of his body. He had broken ribs. He had a torn rectum. He had a brain bleed. And the toxicology component of the autopsy, the chemical analysis of what was present in Caleb's system at the time of his death, revealed traces of fentanyl, a powerful controlled opioid substance. The official determination of Caleb's cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma and thermal injuries, classified as a homicide. Brianna Nichole Young, 27 years old at the time, was Caleb's mother. She was also the mother of 4 other children, all of whom were taken into the custody of the Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services following her initial arrest. She was arrested on the day of Caleb's death on an initial charge of child abuse, then released on a $1 million bond. When the preliminary autopsy results were finalized and reviewed, the Tupelo Police Department upgraded the charge. Young was rearrested on January 26, 2023, and recharged with capital murder. She was booked without bond into the Lee County Adult Jail, where she remained. The investigation into Caleb's case took far longer to formally conclude than the facts on the ground initially suggested it would. Mississippi's State Medical Examiner's Office faced a significant processing backlog, a systemic issue that has affected cases across the state, and the final toxicology and autopsy results did not arrive at the Lee County District Attorney's Office until approximately 18 months after Caleb's death. This delay meant that despite all the preliminary evidence, the formal grand jury process could not begin until that material was received and reviewed. During those 18 months, Brianna Young remained in the Lee County Jail without bond. She filed a motion requesting a bond hearing. Prosecutors opposed the motion, filing a detailed response that outlined the evidence against her, including what they described as a pattern of sustained harm inflicted on a child who had no means to seek help, to communicate distress to anyone outside the home, or to escape the environment in which he was trapped. The court denied bond. On June 28, 2024, a Lee County grand jury returned an indictment. Brianna Nichole Young was formally indicted on 1 count of capital murder, 1 count of child abuse through deprivation of necessities, and 2 additional counts of child abuse for the specific documented injuries to Caleb's back and lower body. She was arraigned on November 19, 2024, and entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. At that arraignment, Assistant District Attorney Josh Wise made a formal announcement on behalf of the Lee County District Attorney's Office. The state of Mississippi, he said, would be seeking the death penalty in this case. Prosecutors then filed a response opposing any bond consideration, which cited the specific nature of the evidence, detailing a pattern of harm inflicted on a nonverbal autistic 5-year-old who could not call for help, report his injuries, or seek assistance from anyone outside the home. The trial was set for November 3, 2025. The Tupelo Police Department, in the course of investigating Caleb's death, developed a broader picture of the Gun Club Road household and its history. A review of municipal court and police records showed that officers had responded to the address multiple times in the years prior to Caleb's death. Domestic violence incidents had been reported. Young had accumulated a significant number of misdemeanor charges over the years in Tupelo Municipal Court. Federal authorities had also opened an inquiry into pandemic-era financial assistance applications associated with her name. The cumulative picture that emerged was of a household that had already been touched by dysfunction and difficulty, a household in which Caleb had been living, in silence, for his entire 5 years of life. Caleb Bogan was nonverbal. He could not tell anyone what was happening to him. He could not pick up the phone and call for help. He could not go to a teacher and show someone his injuries. He was, in the most profound and literal sense, voiceless. The justice system that now carries his case forward, the Lee County Circuit Court, the District Attorney's Office, and the jury that will ultimately decide the fate of Brianna Nichole Young, must speak for him in the only language available to them, the language of law and evidence and accountability. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network, at nctsn.org, provides resources for children who have experienced trauma and for the adults in their lives who are working to support their recovery. For nonverbal and disabled children who may be experiencing abuse, specialized advocates through organizations like Mississippi's Disability Rights Mississippi, at drms.org, can provide an additional layer of support and reporting assistance. If you know a child with disabilities who may not be able to speak for themselves, please speak for them. Caleb had no one to speak for him. Be the person who speaks. Cold Case Hour will continue to follow the trial of Brianna Nichole Young as it proceeds through Lee County Circuit Court. The state of Mississippi has said it intends to seek the ultimate accountability for what happened to Caleb Bogan. Whatever the outcome of those proceedings, Caleb himself, 5 years old, nonverbal, autistic, entirely dependent on the people around him, will not be forgotten by those who learned his name through this story. Caleb Bogan, 5 years old. His voice is this story. Please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and leave a comment for Caleb below. Every view keeps his memory alive, and every subscriber is a person who believes these children deserve to be seen. Case 10. Cynthia Clemons, March 17, 2026, DeSoto County, Mississippi. DeSoto County sits in the northernmost corner of Mississippi, pressed up against the Tennessee border, within the greater metropolitan orbit of Memphis. It is one of the fastest-growing counties in the state, a place where subdivisions have spread across land that was farmland a generation ago, where shopping corridors have followed the population northward from the Jackson area counties, and where a genuine diversity of backgrounds and stories has made its home in communities like Southaven, the county's largest city. Southaven is suburban Mississippi in its most contemporary form, strip malls and apartment complexes and chain restaurants, the landscape of modern American working-class life. It is a place where people live close to each other without necessarily knowing each other well, where the apartment on one floor can have no knowledge of what is happening in the apartment above or below. In March 2026, a Southaven apartment inside the South Park Gardens complex became the center of a case that shook DeSoto County to its foundation, a case built not on the chaos of a sudden violent moment, but on something that investigators found in many ways more disturbing: months of silence. Months of deliberate concealment. Months during which a young woman with Down syndrome, a woman who could not speak, could not seek help, and could not call out to the world that she needed someone to see her, was hidden from everyone who had ever loved her. Makaylia Clemons was 20 years old. Though she was technically a legal adult, her disability meant that her daily life was shaped entirely by the people around her. She was nonverbal. She depended completely on her caregiver for every basic need, for food, for hygiene, for medical attention, for the simple human contact that every person requires to survive, not just physically, but in any meaningful sense of the word. Her family, speaking to reporters in the days after the discovery, described her in terms that stay with you. She had the body of a child, they said, despite being 20. She sat in one spot most of the day. She smiled at you. She never caused any trouble. She never caused any trouble. Think about that phrase. Think about what it means when applied to a 20-year-old with Down syndrome who could not speak and could not move around independently. It means she was entirely in the hands of whoever she was with. It means her world was defined by whoever that person chose to show her. The person responsible for Makaylia's care was her mother, Cynthia Clemons, 40 years old, who had been living with Makaylia and Makaylia's adult brother at the South Park Gardens apartment since 2021. The brother traveled for work and was away from the apartment for extended periods. During those periods, Cynthia and Makaylia were alone together in the apartment. At some point in January 2026, Makaylia Clemons disappeared from the world. Not in the way that a mobile, verbal person disappears. Not through flight, or through her own choice, or through any action of her own. She disappeared in the only way that a completely dependent, nonverbal person with Down syndrome can disappear. Someone stopped allowing her to be seen. When Makaylia's brother returned from his work travels in January and asked about his sister, he was given an explanation. When he asked again, he received a different explanation. When he pressed further, the explanations shifted again. This continued for weeks. At some point in March 2026, the specific date established by the police report as March 17th, the brother saw something through an open bedroom door. Something that he could not look away from. Something that he immediately recognized for what it was. He saw what appeared to be a body in a bag, in the closet of his mother's bedroom. He called 911. Southaven police responded to the South Park Gardens apartment complex at approximately 9:35 in the evening for a welfare check. When they arrived and began interviewing Cynthia Clemons, they encountered the same pattern that the brother had encountered: conflicting information, changing accounts, explanations that did not align with each other or with what the officers were observing in the apartment. Officers obtained a search warrant. They executed that warrant and found what Makaylia's brother had reported: the remains of Makaylia Clemons inside a closet in her mother's bedroom. Makaylia had been there since January. She had been there, in that closed room, in that apartment, while her brother traveled and worked and called and asked and was told different stories by the person who was supposed to be her protector. She had been there while family members spoke to Cynthia on the phone and heard nothing unusual. She had been there while a neighbor at the complex, who was interviewed by reporters, said she had never seen anything unusual at the apartment and had no idea that anything was wrong. Cynthia Clemons, 40 years old, was taken into custody on March 18, 2026. She was charged by the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office with 2 counts, abuse of a vulnerable adult and tampering with evidence. She was booked into the DeSoto County Jail without bond. A court date was set for March 25, 2026. Investigators were clear from the beginning of the investigation that the charges as initially filed did not represent the final picture of criminal accountability. The charges would be driven, ultimately, by what the autopsy determined, by what the state of Mississippi Medical Examiner's Office, which received Makaylia's remains for formal examination, concluded about her cause and manner of death. That determination was pending at the time this documentary was produced. Law enforcement stated publicly that additional charges were expected once those results were available. Makaylia's family responded with a grief that was both raw and deeply complicated. Her aunt, Rosie Atkins, spoke to reporters in the days following the discovery with the kind of honesty that only people in genuine shock can produce. She said that her family was taking it very hard. She described Makaylia, who the family called Carrie, with love and with the particular heartache of someone who had known her well. She said that the family had been speaking to Cynthia on the phone throughout the preceding months and had heard nothing that alarmed them. Nothing. That absence of alarm, that seamless presentation of normality, is one of the most deeply troubling aspects of this case. The tampering with evidence charge against Cynthia Clemons speaks directly to the deliberate nature of what investigators found. Not the sudden panic of someone who does not know what to do in the face of an emergency, but the sustained, calculated effort of someone who chose, over weeks and months, to control the information that the outside world received about what was happening inside that apartment. Makaylia Clemons was 20 years old. She had Down syndrome. She was nonverbal. She smiled at people. She never caused any trouble. She was the most vulnerable person in that apartment, in that complex, possibly in that entire corner of Southaven, and the system that is supposed to protect people like Makaylia failed to see her before it was too late. Disability rights advocates across Mississippi and the country have long argued that adults with significant intellectual and developmental disabilities who live in non-institutional settings with sole or primary caregivers represent one of the least visible and most vulnerable populations in the country when it comes to the risk of abuse and neglect. The systems that track and check on children, school attendance, pediatric appointments, mandatory reporting networks, do not apply in the same way to adults like Makaylia, who had aged out of childhood systems and into a gap where the primary eyes on her welfare were the people inside her own home. Disability Rights Mississippi, reachable at drms.org, advocates for the rights and safety of Mississippians with disabilities and can provide information and assistance for family members or community members who are concerned about a disabled individual in their lives. If you know someone like Makaylia, someone whose daily safety depends entirely on the care and goodwill of one person, and that dependency makes them invisible to the outside world, please find a way to be a set of eyes. Please find a way to be present. One phone call, one visit, one expression of genuine interest in a person's well-being can be the thing that makes the difference between a story like Makaylia's and a story that ends differently. The DeSoto County case will proceed through the Mississippi judicial system as the forensic investigation is completed. The DeSoto County Sheriff's Office, the Southaven Police Department, and the State Medical Examiner's Office are working toward the full legal accounting that Makaylia Clemons deserves. Cold Case Hour will follow this case as it develops, and will bring you updates as the investigation reaches its conclusions and the court proceedings move forward. Makaylia Clemons, 20 years old. She smiled at people. She never caused any trouble. She deserved an entire life. This documentary was produced for educational and informational purposes by Cold Case Hour. All cases presented here are matters of public record, documented through official law enforcement statements, court filings, district attorney communications, and credible journalistic sources. The victims in each of these cases are remembered here with dignity and with the belief that their stories deserve to be told truthfully, carefully, and with full respect for the families and communities they left behind. If you or someone you know has information relevant to any ongoing case discussed in this video, please contact your local law enforcement agency or the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation at their official tip line. For child safety resources, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, 1-800-422-4453, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For missing children, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. For adults with disabilities who may be at risk, Disability Rights Mississippi at drms.org. For substance use support, SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-4357. Cold Case Hour is committed to responsible, respectful, and community-centered true crime content. Every story on this channel is chosen because the victims deserve to be seen, and because the communities that were changed by these events deserve to have the truth told with care. If this documentary has meant something to you, if it has added to your understanding of what happens inside our communities when the systems meant to protect the most vulnerable break down, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Share this video with someone who you think needs to see it. Your support is what allows this work to continue. These stories are not entertainment. They are a record, and Cold Case Hour will keep building that record, one case at a time, for as long as these communities need someone to pay attention. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And please, never stop paying attention.